1540 in search of a golden city called Quivera. It is believed by some that French explorers gave the Ozarks their name, which was originally Aux Arcs, French for the curves of wandering streams, which gradually changed to Ozark by common usage. After the explorers came settlers. Many were descended from early English colonists. They carried their scanty belongings in ox carts and linchpin wagons, and flatboats ferried them across the Mississippi. They were fiercely independent and mistrustful of foreigners, a label which included everyone except themselves. But beginning in 1907, there was to be an important change. A young man, Harrel Bell, wrote a novel set in the Ozarks called The Shepherd of the Hills. The book became an enormous success and is one of the most famous in American literature. Many of the millions who read The Shepherd of the Hills became curious about the wondrous land it described. Today at the Shepherd of the Hills Farm and Theater, the dramatized story of the famous novel is presented every year throughout the summer in a spectacular evening performance, one of America's greatest tourist attractions. It is not too much to say that this book, which made the natural beauty of the Ozarks and the quaint humor and philosophy of the mountain people known to millions of readers, played a vital part in the creation of the vacation paradise we enjoy today. In fact, the Branson Table Rock area is often called the Shepherd of the Hills country, with many references to the book and the characters in it. As Preachin' Bill says in the book, "When God looked upon the work of his hands and called it good, he were sure looking at this here Ozark country, and of all I've seen from Ant Creek Head to the mouth of James and plumb to Pilot Knob, I allow the Mutton Hollow neighborhood is the prettiest." How this book, which brought fame, tourism, and recreation to the Ozarks, can be written by Harrel Bell, is a story of religious faith and hard work, and in a way, it is the story of America. You know, the science of genealogy is really a joke. Who ever heard of ancestors who were thieves and murderers? Nevertheless, two of Harrel Bell Wright's branch were among those venturesome souls of the Revolution who started the USA, and we were mighty proud of them. When the War of Independence was finally over, a young Lieutenant Ebenezer Wright, his wife Grace, settled in the wilderness of upper New York State. Among their household effects was a tall chest of drawers called a highboy. It was transported from Wethersfield, Connecticut to the Hudson River by ox team. Then it journeyed up the Hudson on a sloop to Albany. From Albany it was hauled again by ox team to its home in the Mohawk Valley, which was then the West. In 1861, 75,000 volunteers were called for by Abraham Lincoln. William A. Wright, great-grandson of Lieutenant Ebenezer, was one of them. He was not quite 20 when he enlisted. 4 years later, he came home with a writing box, a bullet wound, a pair of spurs, medals, a watch, a diary, and the rank of lieutenant. In the flush of victory, he met and married a beautiful girl, Alma Watson. They were the parents of Harrel Bell Wright, who was born in Rome, New York, May 4, 1872, in a house his grandfather, Deacon Allen Wright, had built in 1820. As he grew, his mother endowed him with a love of nature which has always been a potent influence in all his writing. With her, he felt the beauty of opening blossoms and the ever-changing clouds and sunsets. With her, he saw the true beauty of even humble weeds. As he grew and picked up a few special words, she gave him other old-fashioned influences that he never forgot. As the glories of the returned war hero gradually faded, there came instead the hand-to-mouth existence of a not-too-industrious, tavern-loving, small-town carpenter. There was a cow and a calf, pigs and chickens, and a horse. The boy worked in the garden, fed the pigs, chopped wood, and earned a little money herding the neighbor's sheep to pasture. His mother's illness began, as far as he knew, one wash day. There were no vacuum cleaners, no refrigerators, no washers or dryers, no running water, not even a bath. The laundry alone for a family was a great task. The poverty and long years of drudgery maintaining the home and family was finally too much for this overworked girl. The 11-year-old boy stopped school and until his death was housekeeper, cook, and nurse. But those days were not dark and sad. In a way, they were quiet, happy days together. They never spoke of that which they both knew, and they did not pretend or attempt to hide it from either. Within a day or two after the funeral, the family, with no wife and mother to hold it together, was broken up. Harrel Bell was put to work for a small farmer and vegetable grower. The farmer this 11-year-old boy went to work for took him like he was an unwanted puppy. He had to get up around 3 or 4 o'clock to go to market, and in the afternoon he'd in the fields and the berry patches. The chores were done much later. For his work, he got what the puppy would have gotten, something to eat and a place to sleep. With the coming of winter, the boy was traded off to another farmer some miles out of town. It was 0 weather, and the snow was deep. His new workplace was much bigger, but another hired man would have cost $13 a month. So that spring he worked right along with the rest of the men. Every Sunday they went to church, and they never ate without a long blessing on the food, no matter how hungry they were. The farmer also blessed the church, the missionaries, the United States, the president, and anything else he could think of. He made vinegar from the apples from the orchard, but when all the good vinegar was sold, he put rainwater in the old barrels. Then, when the water turned sour, he'd sit just like the rest. He went to church a lot, but that vinegar water sure wouldn't make pickles. The boy's father was by this time in Lima, Ohio. There was plenty of work in that booming oil town, and he sent for his son. They lived in a cheap boarding house, and he found Harold a job in a paint shop. But before long, he moved on again. After all, the boy was almost 12 years old and could be left to his own devices. He moved into a tiny rented room and boarded himself. In these days, welfare and social workers, it seems hard to believe, but this boy was completely alone and on his own at the age of 12. He didn't know anybody. So every Sunday he cooked the best dinner he could, cleaned up the room, and washed his clothes. Then he got a job clerking in a bookstore. He only got meals and a place to sleep, but late at night when the store was closed, he had his innings. Shelves and shelves of books. He read everything from Nick Carter to Shakespeare, and he read every night all winter long. There wasn't anything else to do. By the next time his father sent for him, he was in his early teens. His father and some war comrades were living together above a saloon in the red light district of Findlay, Ohio, and he decided that the boy should cook and keep house for them. The only friend the boy had was the cook in the sporting house next door. She was tough, all right, but underneath she was good-hearted and kind. She used to bring him home bread, and she taught him about men and women, both the good things and the bad ones, too. This lowly servant in a house of prostitution was one of the saving influences in the boy's life, for she showed him truth and a simple faith in goodness. Before long, he turned to go on his own again. while he sold magazine subscriptions, and then he turned to selling furniture polish from door to door. It was good polish, too. He knew because he made it himself. Hungry for companionship, he next fell in with a gang of tough young hoodlums. They begged from door to door, or stole, whichever was easier. But he tired of begging and decided to learn a trade. He'd worked some in a paint shop already, and had seen how the men with a trade got jobs, so he decided to be a painter. He apprenticed himself to a firm of painters for the magnificent sum of $2.50 a week. Some years later, and inches taller, he was about to earn his journeyman ticket, and was now first assistant to the owner on their most important jobs. But his father had turned up again, out of work, so they took up lodging together in another red light district tenement. Soon some old comrades moved in. Finally, young Wright, who did the cooking and housekeeping and earned the money to pay the rent and buy the food, had had enough of this tenement way of life. Without really thinking about it, he was beginning to feel a deep urge toward better things. When he finally moved out this time, it was for good. In one of those periods of business depression when many workmen were idle, the young journeyman found there was no work for a painter. For weeks he tramped about the country taking any road his feet strayed into, but he was never a hobo. He chopped wood and did odd jobs for his meals, and slept under haystacks or wherever he could when it overtook him. Often he stopped to sketch a wayside scene or to paint in words the beauty of the countryside. Eventually, he decided to try a city and beat his way to Cleveland, but there was no work there either, and no wood to chop or chores to do. No way to earn even a few pennies. Like many another down on his luck and broke, he found warmth, help, and kindness at the hands of true Christians. He never forgot it. Another year went by in bare, hand-to-mouth, purposeless existence. Then he met an evangelist at a paint shop where he sometimes did odd jobs. The evangelist asked him to paint some signs for a revival. He did the job for nothing, and then, perhaps to see how his work showed up, he attended the meeting. He was greatly excited to hear the evangelist preach the teachings of Jesus, and to understand that anyone who wanted to could live the life Christ taught. His early experiences with those people for whom he worked after his mother's death had not disposed him to their kind of Christianity. From his point of view, there was too much rainwater in their vinegar. But the appeal which Jesus of Nazareth has ever had and must ever have for mankind took deep hold of him. His whole understanding of life was transformed, and his new understanding became the key to his life's endeavor. He came to realize that to live is to serve. All true service is Christian. Like countless loners before him, the words of Jesus gave him something to take hold of and to build his life upon. The young painter was so fired with the idea of making his contribution to life that he decided to become a minter, and to that end he went to Hiram College. But he was not financially able to continue. That winter he developed pneumonia, which put a stop to work of any kind. While convalescing, he painted a picture, and some good Pete thought enough of it to buy it, so he continued painting and selling. In the evenings, he studied as long as he could keep awake, for with his painting money, he would be able to enter school that fall. Then one day, as he sat at his easel, a gray mist, a sort of filmy veil, came between him and the canvas. He called in an eye doctor and was told he would have to give up all thought of painting or reading for many months. They shut him up in a dark room with his eyes bandaged. Then a friend loaned him his trumpet, and he spent hours trying to blow "Go Tell Aunt Rhody" out of it. He said later that without his new faith, he believed he would have gone mad. When he finally came out of that dark room, he knew the oculist was right. He could not return to school that fall. He never did return. 2 years of preparatory schooling was all he ever had. One morning he went down to the river. He had sketched that bit of water many times, but now he couldn't see it very well. He wondered how it would be to swim down into the quiet water and become a part of that calm, untroubled stream. It was the only time in his life he permitted himself such thoughts, but it was the only time he ever faced such total hopelessness. Yet because of his newfound strength in Jesus, he knew in his heart it was impossible. Suddenly he was startled from his black mood by a thought. Why not follow the water south and visit the farm of an Uncle Ben in Missouri? It was during this visit on a fishing trip to the mouth of the James River that Harrel Bell Wright first saw the beautiful backwoods of the Ozark wilderness. He was fascinated. The natives in their log cabins, their little farms, and their quaint homely philosophy enchanted him. Soon he began painting again, using his eyes a little each day. And along with the landscapes and nature studies that he sold, he also began to sketch his Ozark friends and some of his experiences with them. Thanksgiving in the White Oak district was to be observed with an all-day meeting at the schoolhouse. A preacher was coming to hold services. At the last minute, they learned that he could not come. An older Billy approached Wright and said, "You got education, mister. Why can't you preach for Williams?" Wright thought a minute, and then he said, "Well, I reckon I can." This was the exact moment Harrel Bell Wright entered the ministry. The job had found him. He was proud of the comment of a hillbilly grandma who said, "He's got learning all right, but he sure talks so Williams can understand what he's a-meaning." All that winter he preached in that little backwoods schoolhouse. Even the Billy hoodlums finally began to come. Christmas Eve, there were special doings. One little girl was reciting an old favorite. "'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, nothing was stirring, not airy a mouse." And one audience who had perhaps celebrated a bit too much interrupted. "Anybody here like to fight?" Wright put on a brave front and moved to quiet the tough, who suddenly turned the tables yelling, "Me and this yar preacher will whoop any 3 men in the crowd." Saved from this ferocious eater of raw meat by the same tough friends who had been attending his services. When people became so interested in the life and words of Jesus that there were not Sundays enough, he also held a school every Friday night. One winter evening, it was bitter cold and threatening a blizzard. He thought no one would venture out. But the door suddenly flew open, and a member of the class shouted over the storm, "What's the matter? Ain't there going to be no meeting tonight? We ain't all there. We got a fire built, and they're waiting." He sure held meeting that night, and he was never again behind time at the appointed hour of early candle lighting. In the spring, he left the White Oak district and went to Mount Vernon in southwest Missouri to continue painting. But his backwoods preaching followed him. To his growing satisfaction in his ministry, he was asked to hold services, often in schoolhouses or half-abandoned churches in out-of-the-way country districts. Then he was asked to go to Pierce City. The church was a small congregation of the disciples of Christ, and they were too poor to afford a regular pastor. All summer, he made the 25-mile round trip on horseback to preach there. And finally, he became the pastor of the Pierce City Christian Church. Today, the original small church where he preached is a public library. Near the end of his second year at Pierce City, he was invited to the Christian church at Pittsburgh, Kansas. But he did not seem able to make the progress he wanted toward his vision of totally applied Christianity. Then he hit on an idea which led him eventually to the work that was to occupy him all his life. He decided to write a story. He had no thought of publishing a book. He intended only to write a story that he would read to his congregation in installments to make clearer his vision of Christianity. When he read it to his congregation, they were enthusiastic and felt that the story ought to be published to expose its Christian ideas to a greater number of people. And that's how his first novel, That Printer of Udell's, got into print. At 5 years of the Pittsburgh ministry, He was unable to carry on because of failing health. That printer of Udell's had achieved a modest success, and the thought came to him that perhaps he could better serve by writing stories based on true Christian principles. Stories that would reach more people than he ever could as a preacher. It was only natural that he should turn for material to the Ozark Mountains, where he had found help, and to those backwoods folk he knew so well. He knew and loved the region about Dewey Bald, Mutton Hollow, and Marble Cave, and so he went alone to this Ozark neighborhood. There he lived in a tent on a hilltop, and boarded a nearby home of Mr. and Mrs. Ross, who became the Matthews family in his story. Here he created the Shepherd of the Hills, amid the actual scenes described in the story. When the book became a success, he decided to spend the rest of his working life as a writer, dedicated to clean stories based on true Christian principles. Harrel Bell Wright went on to create many world-famous books. But he never considered himself a great writer. He was delighted by the remark of Mr. Ross, who said, "Well, I'll be doggone. If I were going out into the brush to shoot a book feller, I'd sure never take a crack at him." The multi-million sales of these books brought him material success beyond the wildest imagination of his boyhood poverty, such as this home he designed and built in the Arizona sunshine, where he was forced to live because of his health. But the Ozarks and his beloved mountain people were always dearest to his heart. He would have been proud and happy indeed to see the wonders his pen created by writing of these hills, and inspiring his million readers to visit them. As you move about this happy Ozark land, think now and then of the 11-year-old homeless waif who rose out of his poverty to help create it all. It could only happen in America, where we are free to work and believe as we wish. Here, an 11-year-old boy without family or friends, farmed out to labor, forced to grub for food and shelter, was free to rise to whatever heights his ability and determination could take him. Free to the religious turning point of his life in the truths of Jesus. Free to succeed and take millions of reading, vacationing, and worshiping Americans along with him, adding to their knowledge, fun, and happiness. The message of his life is as clear as Ozark stream. We must always keep America the land of true freedom. We must make very sure that in America all things will always be possible to those like Harrel Bell Wright who have faith and are willing to fight for their beliefs and try their best. Another backwoods American said it long ago, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall perish from the earth.